Did you know that Harry and Draco actually get in a fight which causes Hermione to be hit by a stray curse? Or did you know that Ron and Harry get into a physical fight as their friendship reaches its ultimate low point? Well, if you didn't know about either of those events, you're not alone, because many Harry Potter fans who have only seen the movies missed out on hundreds of pages of plot from the book that never made the cut. The weeks following Harry's selection as the fourth Triwizard Champion are a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and frustration as Harry navigates this new controversy and his upcoming task. But unfortunately, these first 3 weeks of November at Hogwarts during Harry's fourth year are almost completely removed from the film, as the writers just didn't have time to fit in everything from the book. So in today's video, I'm going to reveal exactly what happened during those weeks, and compare these scenes to their corresponding pages in the book, finding all the changes, revisions, and omissions along the way. And by the end, I want to hear from you about which version you prefer. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to episode 49 of Movies vs. Manuscripts Harry Potter Edition. Before we get started, I wanted to shout out this commenter from my last episode. If you want to be featured in a future video, be sure to share your thoughts down below when you're done watching. As always, I'll cover all the changes across the 4 major categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot. But first, let's recap what happened during these scenes in the movie. That way, it's fresh in our mind for the analysis. So, picking up from where we left off last episode, we see the movie quick cut to a random day as Harry and the other champions are having their photo taken for the Daily Prophet. We meet the iconic journalist Rita Skeeter as she introduces herself and tells the students they'll each be interviewed for the paper. She starts with Harry, and we see them go into a cupboard to talk things over. Harry quickly realizes that Rita isn't the most honest of writers out there, as her quick quotes quill writes down things that he never said. The movie then cuts to Harry in the Owlry as he receives a reply from Sirius, which requests that they'll meet that night in the Gryffindor common room. So obviously after that, we jump cut to Harry in the common room as he talks with Sirius, who pops up in the fire. Sirius tells him to be wary of Karkaroff and Barty Crouch, and then Ron comes downstairs and interrupts their conversation, saying that he thought he heard voices. Harry tells him that he's probably just hearing things again, and Ron goes back upstairs. The movie then cuts to another day as Harry is studying by the lake with Neville, who is in the water, and Hermione approaches with Ron in tow. Hermione delivers a confusing message from Ron to Harry, basically saying that Hagrid is looking for him. So the movie cuts once again to later as Harry meets up with Hagrid that night and finds out about the dragons. We then see the movie change scenes to daytime as Harry goes up to Cedric and tells him about the dragons. That way he's filled in since Fleur and Victor know as well. We then see Harry and Ron get into a small little fight before Draco makes fun of Harry. Harry then insults Draco's father, and he turns around to leave, but as he does, Draco reaches for his wand. Thankfully, Mad-Eye Moody is quicker than that and transfigures Draco into a ferret. This hilarious punishment only ends once McGonagall runs outside and tells Moody to stop. Moody then takes Harry to his office and they talk about the upcoming task. He gives Harry advice about being able to use his wand, and then our scenes end for this week as the movie cuts to the day of the first task, which we'll cover in the next episode. As you can tell from this summary, the movie does a lot of jumping around, with some of these moments occurring during this 3-week period in November, and other moments having already occurred earlier in the book. It's a confusing, jumbled up mess, and I understand they couldn't fit everything from the book into the movie, but I can't help but think that they could have organized the timeline a little bit better. But I'll let you be the judge of that after you've heard all of the changes. And speaking of which, let's get started by covering the first 3 categories of characters, timeline, and location. Starting with characters, we only have a few differences. If you've watched the earlier episodes of my series, you'll recognize the name Bertha Jorkins, who is dead in the books but plays a key role in the plot, specifically in the discovery of Barty Crouch Jr. later on. Then we're also missing Ludo Bagman, who is very much alive and involved in orchestrating the Triwizard Tournament. So he's around quite a bit, but was cut from the movie. Another familiar face who gets cut is Charlie Weasley, as we personally hear from him during the dragon part of these chapters. Remember, Charlie is a part of the wizarding group who works with dragons. And finally, I'm going to include Pansy Parkinson in the missing characters. Technically, we see Pansy in the background of some scenes, but in the book, she's kind of like a Crabbe and Goyle, constantly following Draco around and being a significant supporting character for him. She gets multiple lines in the book and helps to round out the Slytherin squad, but we never actually hear from her in the movies. Oh, and I guess I should also add Colin and Dennis Creevy in here, who follow Harry around everywhere. but they don't really make it into the film. But now moving on to timeline, we only have a couple small differences. First, I'm pretty sure Draco got turned into a ferret during the first week of classes. At the very least, I know it was way before November. Draco and Harry do get into it in these chapters, but there's a much different ending to that dispute, which we'll cover in the plot changes. If you want to know more about Draco's real ferret experience from the book, you can go watch episode 47 of my series. For the sake of time, I'm not going to get into it again today. The second timeline difference is a small one, but one I must mention nonetheless, and that is the fact that Harry doesn't meet Sirius until 2 weeks after he gets the letter from him. It's not the same night. After all, Sirius and Harry must plan on him being alone in the Gryffindor common room, and so he gives Harry time to figure that out. Finally, for our first 3 categories, we have location, and there's one significant omission, and that is Snape's classroom. Draco and Harry's fight happens outside of this classroom, and then Harry and Ron get detention in there as well. But again, we'll unpack that more in the plot changes. Before we get into the plot changes, I just want to give a huge shout out to Jason, Joshua, Timothy, Robo Steve, and the rest of my incredible Patreon supporters who help make these videos possible every month. Also, just as a reminder, I can't go through each word of the dialogue in the book, because that would take forever. But I'll do my best to point out the plot-relevant dialogue changes. If you're looking to relive these moments in full though, I highly recommend checking out the audiobooks on Audible. You can claim a free trial using the link in the description, which supports the channel and gets you one free audiobook of your choice. Now with that being said, let's dive into the plot changes. To start things off, we need to look at a couple of key moments from the start of chapter 18, since the movie just skips straight to Rita Skeeter. The book, however, picks up the morning after the champion selection ceremony, and we read about Harry's first week back at school. So here's what we miss. The morning after, Harry wakes up and is torn between staying in the Gryffindor common room, where Colin and Dennis Creevey would pester him all day, or going to the Great Hall for breakfast, where he'd have to encounter the rest of Gryffindor cheering for him. He eventually decides the Great Hall is the better option, but as soon as he exits the portrait hole, he runs into Hermione, who, being the best friend ever, had brought him toast so that he wouldn't have to go down for breakfast. He thanks her and they go out to the lake to walk around and talk about the previous night. Eventually, she tells him that he must write Sirius again, and so he does, which is what will eventually trigger their meeting later on in the chapters that we're covering today. The book then moves into the next day, and we learn all about Harry's first day back at classes, as he realizes that the other schoolhouses are nowhere near as supportive as his fellow Gryffindors, especially the Hufflepuffs, who normally are on good terms with everybody. But now everyone seems to hate Harry for taking the spotlight away from Cedric. Next, we have another omission from the start of the chapter, which brings us to Harry's time in Care of Magical Creatures class that week. To start, Harry runs into Draco, who makes fun of Harry by saying he won't last 10 minutes in the tournament. Obviously, the movie took part of this dialogue and used it for the ferret scene. Harry ignores Draco, and Hagrid walks out of his hut to start class, which involved them taking the now massive blast-ended Scroots on walks to get their energy out. Hagrid tells them that they were killing each other because they had pent-up aggression from not using their energy. Hagrid asks Harry to come help him with something, which gets them alone so that they can talk things over. This is the first time that Harry's getting to talk with Hagrid after his selection that weekend, and Hagrid comforts Harry as he is one of the only people who believes Harry didn't put his name in the goblet. Now moving on to our next omission, we finish up this first week before Rita gets involved by reading about Harry's double potions lesson that Friday. We read things got worse and worse day by day, and by Friday, the Slytherins had made their Potter Stinks badges, which were spreading around the school. And this is where things start to boil over, and we get the first of 2 outbursts from Harry in these chapters. While waiting for the class to start, the students stayed outside in the hallway, and Draco showed Harry the new badges. He then asked Hermione if she wants one, but says that he doesn't want to touch the hand of a mudblood. This causes Harry's anger, which had been building up all week, to explode out of him as he drew his wand and pointed it right at Malfoy. Malfoy also drew his wand, and after a tense moment of them staring at each other, they both cast spells at the same time, which hit each other and ricocheted into Goyle and Hermione. Goyle's face started to break out in boils, and Hermione's front teeth grew to the length of a beaver's. Soon after this, Snape arrived and asked what all the commotion was about. Draco blamed Harry, saying that Goyle got cursed in the face, and so Snape sent him to the hospital wing. After Goyle left, Ron and Harry showed Snape Hermione's teeth, but Snape said that he didn't notice a difference, which might be one of the most cruel things Snape has done so far in the series, in my opinion. I guess something that we don't really get much of in the movie is just how much Snape dislikes Hermione as well, as he views her as an annoying know-it-all. But still, don't take out your hatred for Harry on Hermione. After this comment, Harry runs off crying and isn't seen for the rest of the day as Madame Pomfrey tends to her teeth. This obviously causes Ron and Harry to go insane at the injustice Snape just showed, which earns them both detention. Thankfully for Harry though, he was spared from sitting through a double potions class, as Colin Creevey came to the door and said that he was sent to retrieve Potter for photos. Snape then very reluctantly let Harry leave, and it's a good thing he did because they were working on antidotes that day, and Snape was hinting that they'd poison Harry so they could test antidotes on him. But anyway, that finally brings us to what we see in the movie, which is Rita Skeeter meeting the champions. However, what we see in the movie isn't really what happens in the book. Like, at all. I mean, the interview is similar, but everything surrounding it is wrong. For starters, they technically weren't just getting their photos and being interviewed, but rather they needed to do the weighing of the wands ceremony, in which all the champions and judges were present. This ceremony involved Ollivander looking at each of the champions' wands to see if they were fit to use during the tournament. Because this was an essential part of this famous tournament, the Daily Prophet had sent a photographer and Rita Skeeter to do a bit on it. But Rita Skeeter had other plans in mind, as once Harry arrived early, she pulled him aside for a private interview. She wasn't really planning on interviewing the others, just him. Thankfully, Dumbledore found them in a cupboard nearby and saved Harry just as the interview was going downhill. Then we read about the weighing of the wands as Ollivander checks each wand, and the most important thing we learn here is that Fleur really is part Vila. She tells Ollivander that her wand core is the hair of a Vila, and more specifically, a hair from her grandmother who was a Vila. Harry thinks of Ron in this moment and really wants to tell him, but remembers they aren't on speaking terms. Other than that, the wand review is pretty standard, and Ollivander approves all of them to compete. And the chapter ends as Harry goes back to his dorm that night, and Ron tells him that there's an owl for him, which contains Sirius's reply and sets up their meeting for 2 weeks from then. The start of the next chapter takes us into our next big omission, which is really all about the 2 weeks between the weighing of the wands and Harry's meeting with Sirius. There are quite a few changes during this time, but to start, I just want to fill you in on a few of the smaller details we get that helps build out the world for these weeks. First of all, we read that Harry and Hermione figured out a plan to get everyone out of the common room in a couple of weeks for Sirius and Harry to meet. And if worse came to worse, they would drop dung bombs to get everyone to leave. On top of this, we get a more full picture of Rita's article, which really does Harry dirty. This is probably the largest change here at the start of the chapter, as we read that Rita spelled Fleur and Victor's names wrong and didn't even bother mentioning Cedric. Plus, she misquoted Harry constantly and completely made up things like Harry saying, "Yes, sometimes at night I still cry about my parents. I'm not ashamed to admit it." Plus, she writes that Harry's close friend, Colin Creevey, reported that Harry is dating the stunningly pretty Hermione Granger, who, like Harry, is one of the top students at school. All in all, these fake quotes and claims made the rest of the school hate Harry even more. The next change we have is the fact that Hermione does not deliver a message from Ron to Harry. That scene in the film is made up, and in reality, it is Hagrid himself who delivers this message to meet up. But how? Well, we learn that the week before the first task, the students were permitted to visit Hogsmeade, and Hermione encouraged Harry to go with her to the Three Broomsticks. Harry didn't want to go, but he reluctantly agreed as long as he could wear the invisibility cloak the whole time. Which was a good choice because as soon as they got to the Three Broomsticks, they spotted Rita Skeeter. By the way, on a side note, the movie really doesn't do a good job at communicating how much Harry and Hermione hung out during this time when Ron wasn't talking to him. The movie almost makes it seem like Hermione hung out with Ron and Harry was alone, but personally, I can see why some of the students in the book would think that Hermione and Harry were dating at this time, because all of these chapters are pretty much just them hanging out. But anyway, they go to the Three Broomsticks without Ron and run into Hagrid and Mad-Eye Moody. Surprisingly, Harry learns that Moody can see through his invisibility cloak, and he must have told Hagrid that Harry was there, because Hagrid leaned down and whispered to Harry to meet him that night so he could show him something. And that brings us to our next change, as that night, Harry goes to visit Hagrid, who shows him the dragons. But what the movie left out is Charlie Weasley. Charlie talks to Hagrid and says that his mom has been so upset over Harry entering the tournament. Not upset at Harry, but upset that Dumbledore and the others are letting him compete. And Charlie says that after the article in the Daily Prophet came out, Molly has been crying because she thinks Harry still cries at night about his parents. This just makes Harry upset as he sits there invisible and listens to it all. And out of all of our changes today, I'm okay with the movie removing Charlie from this scene. After all, he's not really a main character in the grand scheme of things. But anyway, the next change comes after Harry is done looking at the dragons, as he realizes he needs to hurry back to the castle because that same night is when he's supposed to meet Sirius. At that point, it's like 11:30, and his talk with Sirius is scheduled for midnight. So he starts to run back and then randomly runs into Karkaroff. Karkaroff is shocked by this, but he has no idea what happened because Harry is still invisible. This is a very short moment in the chapter, but it's key because it fills us in on the fact that Victor will also know about the dragons. In the movie, we only see Madame Maxime and Harry there, and then later Harry tells Cedric that Victor knows as well. So how did Victor find out? Well, the book explains it right here, as Karkaroff must have been walking in the woods to get a peek at the dragons. But now that the dragon stuff is wrapped up, we only have a few more changes, as Harry meets with Sirius and then plans for his dragon task. So of course, our next change is regarding Harry's conversation with Sirius, which is much longer in the book. Like I said earlier, I try not to get into the dialogue too much, but this conversation is important as specific plot points are mentioned that are never covered in the movie. For example, Sirius mentions Bertha Jorkins, who went missing. Sirius says he knew Bertha in school and she was always very dumb and naive. He suspects foul play, unlike what the Ministry of Magic has reported. He also mentions that Karkaroff was a Death Eater, just like the movie does, but what the movie doesn't include is when Sirius explains that Moody was the one who caught Karkaroff and put him in Azkaban. I guess they insinuate this in the film, but it's never confirmed. Then finally, their conversation ends as Sirius tells Harry that there's a simple spell he can use which will help him in his task against the dragon. But before Sirius can tell him the spell, Harry cuts him off as he hears someone coming down the stairs. That person is, of course, Ron. And this is where we have our next change, which is Harry's second blow-up of these chapters. Ron and Harry's relationship reaches its lowest point here as Ron seems to be coming around, but Harry has a lot of pent-up aggression from the last 2 weeks. Similarly to the movie, they make snide comments back and forth, but the argument culminates with Harry picking up a Potter Stinks badge and tossing it right at Ron. It hits him on the forehead, and Harry yells, "You might even have a scar now if you're lucky. That's what you want, isn't it?" And right after this, Harry storms past Ron and goes up to his dorm. And that is where the chapter ends. This is yet another example of the massive personality difference between Harry in the movies and Harry in the books. In the books, Harry is a lot more passionate and emotional, and we really don't see much of that until the later films. I don't know if you guys remember, but in our first few episodes of this series, in The Philosopher's Stone, we talked about Harry's first class with Snape, and how he gave Snape sass when he barely even knew who he was. So yes, Harry is the type of person to get really emotional and chuck a badge at his friend's forehead, unlike the movie, which has Harry awkwardly stand there and just make a couple of snarky remarks until Ron leaves. But anyway, let's finish today's episode up with our last two changes. The first of which brings us to the library where Hermione and Harry study up on dragons. This is omitted from the movie as they get to the first task pretty quickly, but in the book, we read that Harry and Hermione searched for hours to find anything they could use against a dragon, but they couldn't find anything, especially since Harry was not able to perform the same level of spells as the other champions. But that's not really the key detail here. The more important detail is the fact that Victor Crumb shows up in the library and Hermione gets upset, saying that they should leave before Victor's fangirls arrive. And we get the feeling that this has happened multiple times in the last few weeks, with Victor randomly showing up in the library when Hermione has been studying, and then the Victor fans disrupting things. As you'll know if you read the book, we'll see later that Victor wasn't really going to the library to study, as much as he just wanted to be near Hermione. But that's for a future episode. Now moving on to the last change, we have a small change regarding how Harry tells Cedric about the dragons. In the movie, it's a quick moment before Draco's ferret incident, but in the book, we read about a completely different set of circumstances. Harry is in the halls as students go about their classes, and he spots Cedric. He randomly thinks about how Cedric doesn't know about the dragons, and it seems like the right thing to do to tell him. So he casts a spell at Cedric's book bag, which causes it to tear. Cedric then tells his friends to go on ahead to their charms class while he cleans up his books, thinking that it was a total accident. And this gives Harry the opportunity to catch Cedric in a rare moment alone. He then tells him about the dragons, and we get the feeling that Cedric doesn't seem to believe Harry. After all, why would Harry give up the advantage and tell his competitor about this secret? But before Harry can continue to explain, Moody pulls him away. Then, similarly to the movie, we see Moody help give Harry advice about what to do in his first task. And that wraps up our changes for this episode. So now that you've heard them all, which do you think is the most impactful? And would you have done anything differently? Let me know in the comments below. As always, be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and check out the series playlist to catch up on any episodes you might have missed so far. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.